themselves. It just sort of came from my own love of colour and sewing, and I love small things, and I had seen pocket hearts around. I didn't invent them. I'd seen different versions, and I just felt that I could make quite a cute, fun version and use that in some way. And then I had started seeing some other kindness projects around the place and really admired that, and at first felt how amazing that someone else is doing that, and then all of a sudden thought, well, why can't I, if I'm passionate about that and I think I could do that and I sew anyway, why couldn't I do something along those lines? And so then I just did, and it was fabulous. I've told this story so many times, and I feel like each time I tell it, it could change up a bit. I think essentially it came from all that experience with, I guess, working with people who are vulnerable and in crisis and needing support. So by the time I thought of 1,000 Hearts, I had worked with a lot of people in a lot of different situations, so mental health and suicide intervention, and had started working in the young person space. So it was partly from that, I suppose, from seeing the need for connection, for kindness, and for showing love to one another when there's something difficult going on. The hearts are just hearts, they're just felt, stuffed and sewn together. And kindness, I think, in a way, is when you're kind to someone, you're doing something to someone, and it can make you feel good that you're helping or what have you. But I think the thing that I love about the project and running the project is it's not about me being kind, it's about creating connections. So when somebody sends me, people send me very personal stories to say, this is why I would love to receive one of your hearts or several of your hearts. And some of those stories are absolutely heartbreaking. So I sort of carry a lot of people's stories, and I hold that very dear. I think that's a huge honour and a privilege to carry people's stories. I'd made about 50 hearts and just given them away on my personal page. Does anyone want these? You know, I wasn't sure what people would think. And Hugo and his mum wrote to me and said how much that heart had meant to him, and he was quite anxious and worried about school and various things, and it was quite miraculous because having the heart in his pocket allowed him to do things that he couldn't otherwise do. And so Hugo's story and his communication of that story to me and his mother's messages to me really made me think there's something in this, there's something much more than me sitting here sewing and sending out hearts. There's something that happens in that exchange of, and I think it's essentially it's an exchange of love. It's saying, I care enough to make something about you. And when that happens between strangers, I think that can be really quite powerful and quite a beautiful thing. An example that I shared quite early on in the page, on the Facebook page, was a young man that I spoke to when I was telephone counselling at Lifeline, and he was a suicide in progress. So he had taken some medication and then called Lifeline, and his life was at risk, and he was getting a little bit dozy, I suppose, because of the medication that he'd taken, but he was still alert and conscious and had called us, and I took that call. And this young man was, and I remember him, it was a long time ago now, but I remember him because he was so alone. And in that role as the counsellor, I was trying to find something to link him to life, like someone that he loved or someone who cared about him living or dying. And he couldn't identify anyone. So I don't know if there was someone that he didn't know or couldn't think about at that time, but he couldn't give me anyone that cared or that he felt cared. You know, and he said to me, there's no one. I just have no one who cares. And I said, well, I care. And I did. The thing was, that is actually something that you are advised to say at certain times. If someone's got no one, you can be their person who cares. But I actually did, after having that conversation with him and exploring his story and talking to him, I cared so much, and I really didn't want him to die. And so I just sort of told him that and said, I really don't want you to die tonight, and I care, and we've talked. And, you know, and in that moment there was quite a powerful thing. I think I felt like I was right there with him, even though he was in a different state to me. And then he just went completely silent, which in that situation is horrendous, because anything could have happened on the other end of the phone, especially in that type of situation where I don't know how much medication he's taken and all that. So I sort of waited, and in the back of my mind I'm just going, what's happening? And then I said, how does that feel to have somebody say that they care about you? And so he paused a bit more, and then he just said, feels good. And then I was able to go into that. He gave me his address, he gave me his contact details, and I was able to get the ambulance to him, and I spoke to him a little bit more, by which time he was becoming quite out of it. So we had a little bit more, and then the last thing I heard about him was the ambulance officer picked up the phone and said, we've got him, and the phone went dead. So, but it was very powerful for me just because of that, just that moment where I could feel something shifted because somebody cared about him. And I was a complete stranger. I have no idea what happened to that young man, and he didn't know me, I didn't know him. But in offering something of myself, and it took its toll on me, that phone call, as they do, but in offering that to him and caring, at least for that one night, it actually saved his life. And I think emotionally, that's how people's lives are saved, when someone, for all of us, when someone cares about us, that's what makes life worth living. And that's, I think, the hearts essentially are a symbol of that. And I've never said no to someone who's requested a heart. I've always, even if it's someone else has made the hearts, because some people send them and make them to me when I'm a bit desperate, and have had a lot of requests. But I've never not sent a heart to someone who's asked, and I never will say no or not send one, because I think that's the whole point of it is, I just think it's important to do something that you're not rewarded for other than by knowing that you've shown care. For me, that's important. This is something I've been thinking about a lot, because a lot of people say to me, oh, you must be an extraordinary person, you must be a fantastic person to do that. And I'm not. I'm just an ordinary woman. And I think perhaps there's something in looking at me and saying, oh, she must be special, that's why she's done it. I'm not special enough to do it, so that's why I'm not doing it. Whereas if people can say, Sarah's a very ordinary person and she's done something that, you know, has made a difference for people, then that allows anyone to do that, because it is an ordinary person doing something that, and it is, in the big scheme of things, it's a small thing that I'm doing. But the personal messages that I get and the meaning for people is incredibly powerful. And I think that's, if people get something from the project, I don't want it to be that you have to be able to sew or that you have to be able to be crafty. The message that I would want people to have is that it's okay to put yourself out there, it's okay to share your heart and be courageous with who you are, because you only get one shot at life, and if you don't, well, that's my belief, and if you don't do the things that mean something to you, then what's the point of it? What's the point of being here? I actually think authenticity is the most important thing that we can show to one another, and in, I think, revealing ourselves as real people, that's a gift to give to one another. And I think it gives permission to other people then to be their real selves. And as I've got older, I've started saying, like, I only want real people in my life, not as opposed to imaginary friends, but as opposed to people who are pretending and living up to a superficial ideal of what they think they should be. And I think when you meet someone who's real, you can recognise that quite fast. And I think it's not that common still in our society. I think we wear our masks, we pretend a lot. I find it quite rare to come across someone who will be a real person, and that's what I want both my kids to take away, I guess, and hopefully see me doing, at least to a degree, and I'm getting better at it. And I think trying to live that authentic sort of self in what I do, and 1,000 Hearts is part of that. My Dutch grandfather, so he was my opa, and I was very close to him. He was a very of that generation, quite not very expressive with his emotions, but I lived with my Oma and Opa for a short time when I was about 4, so I developed when my parents split up, and it was a very difficult time for the family, and I lived with them probably for about 6 months, and I bonded very closely, particularly to my grandfather, and just had a lot of respect for him. He was in the Dutch Resistance. He was an actual heroic sort of a person, you know, risked his life plenty of times for people that he cared about and strangers, and just an incredible man. And he just had a lot of wisdom around what I think is a very human truth, that you can't actually help other people in essence unless they're kind of really ready for it. And he just had, when he died, we discovered a poem that he carried around in his wallet that was essentially about that sometimes all you can do is stand back and watch people struggle, and even though it hurts, and you can try to do what you can do, and sometimes you can make a difference, but essentially it's up to each of us to find our own way forward. And you know, for me that's been really important in the work that I've done, that sometimes you do need to set aside that I guess a sense of responsibility for other people's well-being, you know, and I very much believe in doing what you can and standing by and offering care, but you can't take responsibility for other people's lives. I'm 41 now, and I think this happened with my father about a year ago, or maybe a bit less than a year. So the story that I heard growing up was that when I was very young, I had this spirit and this aliveness and this capacity for joy and energy that when, so my mother left our family when I was quite young, and it was in a very devastating, awful way for all of us, including her, and it broke our family, and it broke myself and my siblings in certain ways when you lose your mother. She's still alive and we have a really great relationship now, but we did grow up without her around. And so there was a brokenness in us, and my dad always used to say to me, oh, you know, when you were young you had this spirit and this fire, and then when Mum left you lost that. And it broke my heart. That was him as a father saying how hard that was for him to see that occur in his child, which as a mother obviously we can really connect with that, how hard that is to see your child suffer. And I was catching up with him last year, and I think I was talking about my job and the hearts, and I'm just talking to him about stuff that I was really inspired by and things that I'd been making happen, and excitement and good stuff, and he started to cry, and I said, what's going on there, you know, why are you crying? And he said, I've always said that you had that spirit and it went, but now I can see that it's come back. And so of course I cried as well, and it was a really beautiful moment for him and I. But for me personally, that was such an incredibly powerful moment, that I guess in a way that lifelong story of me having lost my spark, to know that spark could come back was incredibly powerful and moving for me, not only for myself, but all I wanted then was to say to everyone, anyone who has lost something like that, anyone who's lost heart or lost energy or lost hope, it can come back. It's not, even if that's the story you've been telling yourself or you've been told for a really long time, it doesn't have to be who you are. You can find that again, and it can come back and be renewed. And I think that is something that it would be really nice for people to hear and to believe. And and it's a very beautiful space to be in, to feel that it can, and it does.